Hello, vibrant souls. Welcome back to another episode of the Nereyda Ramirez podcast. I haven't released an episode in the last couple of weeks, so I'm really excited to be here. And like always, I'm really grateful that you're here too. So, in this episode, I want to explore out loud and to talk about this question of how many people are depressed because they can't say no. And if you're listening to this and if you're in a space or in a dark season in your life, I would encourage you and even challenge you to ponder on this for yourself. How much of my depression is because I can't say no in my life? How much of my depression or dark space or season is because I'm not doing something that I actually want to do? So this episode is inspired by an Uber ride, freaking awesome, to the airport. So 2 weeks ago, I went to Canada for a Rubenfeld Synergy conference, and super amazing, fucking beautiful and transformative and very deep conference. Still taking all of that in and merging it into my life now that I'm back in California. But I ended up taking a ride with two other people to the airport, and we were sharing about our time at the conference. We're talking about, how we felt like at home. How we were just getting to know each other, like really good stuff. And we ended up talking about relationships and just pondering on, like that. And I was sharing my story, how a couple of years ago, I almost got married and I felt depressed for the first time in my life. And for the first time in my life, I felt like being dead was so much better than being alive. How being dead felt so much more peaceful than being alive. Because obviously my life, in that season in my life, was not peaceful whatsoever. And as I was just talking, I was, expressing how I got out of it. And when I got out of it, I was pondering, okay, what just happened? I felt like I got sucked into this dark hole and now I'm out of it. Like, what the heck happened? And one of the things that popped up for me was, well, you didn't know how to say no. Like, I didn't know how to say no. And it just dawned on me, how many people are depressed because of that, because they can't say no. And the people that I was with, the woman that I was with really took that in and was like, wow, that there's truth to that. And the people that I was with, both of them encouraged me to do an episode about it. So here I am doing an episode about this. And if you've been on my podcast, there is another episode about how to say no. So maybe some of the stuff may align, some of it may not. But here we go. Let's ponder on this together. And let me also just share again that I'm grateful that you're here. So thank you for listening. If there's anything that arises for you, whether you agree with me, whether you don't, whether you have questions about it, feel free to reach out, especially if you're in this season of being depressed or in a dark place. Know that you're not alone and that there is a tribe. Here I am, and we are open for you. Our hearts are open for you. So to start off, right? How many people say yes to people, to places, to things, to events, to situations when we really want to say no? Right? How many of us say yes to all of that when we know we're not going to feel good in it? When we know that there is already an energetic type of resistance or pushback, we're just thinking about saying yes. Or already when we said yes, it's a lot of that, right? And how many of us are afraid to say no, right? How many of us, maybe not even afraid, how many of us, it's hard to say no. Maybe we've never learned it. Maybe it's just really uncomfortable. How many of us don't say no because we're trying to save face, because we're trying to be kind, because we don't want to be looked as rude or bitchy? How many of us don't want to say no because we seek validation from that? How many people around us give us praise because we say yes? And though we're doing it and there's a little bit of resistance, the validation and the praise feels so good. Right? So more of it too. It's how many of us say, or we can say no because it feels so uncommon, because we feel uncomfortable, because we feel like crap, or we feel guilty, or there's so many scenarios, guys. How many of us feel afraid or can't say no because we know it's going to be a little uncomfortable for the other person, and we're trying to take care of their feelings or their situation or trying to take care of their needs. So a lot of really good questions to ponder on, right? Which when I've been learning to say no, when I learned in that season in my life, I'm still learning now, are things that I question constantly. And I try to check in with myself. And a lot of it is really checking in with ourselves continuously and constantly. And even though it's uncomfortable to look at, even the idea of like, oh yeah, I'm saying yes because I want praise, it's a little bit of an awareness to move forward with learning how to say no, with learning how to create peace in our lives. Again, like, it's uncomfortable to look at the mirror and to reflect on these questions because we don't know what the answer is going to be like. And sometimes it could be like a selfish thing where it's like, oh yeah, like I'm saying yes because I want to make sure that I'm like a good daughter, that I come off as a good daughter. And yet, again, we look at the mirror, we look at ourselves, there's like deep reflection, and the pondering continues of like, hold on, like, what do I value? What do I want the most? Do I want to be looked as a really good daughter, or do I want peace in my life? And time again, right? Like, even if it takes a while, it's like, okay, hold on, like, I want peace in my life. Like, fuck looking like a good daughter. I don't know if I want to do that anymore. And I'm telling you from even like a personal experience with that scenario itself, where it was like, actually, like, no, I don't want to be looked like that anymore. Like, I know that I'm a good daughter, even if it's not to how they're seeing it. Like, I know that I try my best in whatever capacity that I can to show up in this way. And it goes back to, okay, but I want peace, right? Like, because both can coexist. But I think a lot of that goes back to doing like our own work for ourselves and being aware of our intentions and being grounded with our intentions, because it's not like we intentionally want other people to be uncomfortable. It's not like we intentionally want to say no out of like malice or like a bad intention. It's really getting grounded with our own intention and walking and moving forward or standing alone in it and knowing that you are a good person, that again, like, you had good intentions, that you are a kind person. So it's really standing in with that, right? And the other thing too that pops up is like doing the work for ourselves in a way where we know our own worth and our own value, and we know what we bring to the table. And you don't have to know all of, right? Like, it took me a while to officially own up to what I can bring to the table, but it was a lot of years of just wondering, like, what do I bring to the table? And a lot of years of just wondering, well, I know I bring this, but I don't think I bring all of this. And so much fear around just losing people, losing like how they perceived me and like their opinions. And again, it was continual and consistent work of checking in with myself and knowing what I bring in my own strengths and my own values, in my own intention, right? Because at some point, I really, really, really do believe, and I feel like I'm maybe stepping into it a little bit, where you can say no and the guilt won't be as strong, or it won't be even present anymore. Where you can say no, and yeah, it may come off as like, I don't care, but you'll be able to say no, and people or whoever is around you, their reactions won't affect you, right? Like, there will be a time where you'll be able to say no and immediately feel the peace. Like, oh yeah, this is why I'm saying no, because I want this peace in my life. So again, it doesn't happen overnight, especially if we grew up in environments and homes and situations where it was so common and encouraged for us to take care of other people's needs. So yeah. So that's what, yeah, now I'm just like I have like my little note thingy and I'm just totally talking without this, which I love episodes like that when I have like a little blueprint and I'm just don't even look at it. I'm just like, yeah, this and this and this. But so a little bit about like my story, right? So at the time, maybe I want to say it was like 2017, no, 19, 18. I think 2018, around that time, right? I read it in my book too, The Vibrant Unknown. Um, I wanted to go to Vietnam, and yet little did I know that I had a lot of little fears that were stopping me from going. And little did I know how, yes, like I feel like I've always had somewhat of a good self-esteem. However, there is a lot of the feelings that I had of being unwanted and wanting a man to validate these feelings of me being wanted, of me being beautiful, of me like being somebody's person, like special person, like wanting to feel special, right? So during that time, I got into this relationship and it was very, very quick. It went from being strangers to like almost getting married within like a year of a span. And during that time, it was like one of those spaces where it was just like, okay, okay, yes, yes, let's get like, yes, we'll do this, yes, we'll do that. Like, okay, we're gonna get married. Like, I want to help you. And it's so crazy to think about it, right? But one of the things that pops up now, or not now, one of the things that popped up then that is so crazy to think about now because I'm not in that space anymore is how much I cared about what his family thought of me and how much I cared about them seeing me as a very kind and noble person, and how much I cared that his friends didn't think that I was like a bitch. Crazy, right? Like to think that that's the way that I thought back then. And it's something that I want to share too, that if you're in those spaces or you've been in those spaces, like it's okay. We don't know any better in those given moments. And at some point, we have to give forgiveness. We have to show compassion and forgiveness for those parts of ourselves that just didn't know any better, that didn't know how to stand up for ourselves or how to say no, or that wanted validation so bad or wanted praise so bad from other people. So I've worked on those spaces of myself. There's so much compassion for that girl, for that woman, um, in my early 20s, right? So so that happened, right? So it was just like a yes, 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 like okay. And there were um like the way that it transpired is that I stopped talking to a lot of my close friends, and I also stopped talking to my family. And my family actually also stopped talking to me. They didn't want anything to do with me as long as I was in this relationship, and they made it known. So they were pretty like, "Yep, this like no." And I felt very alone in that season, and I feel like the only people that I could really, really reach out to, but even then, right, it's not that I reached out to them because I didn't talk about it. I was very just, everything's fine, I'm good, we're good, like we're doing this. But the only people that really made me feel like, okay, like I have some kind of support, even if it's just through our conversations of how we're doing, is my best friend and my sister. So those were like the only two people that were in my life. And if anything, they were also encouraging the marriage and the relationship. But again, like they also didn't know any better. They knew inherently something was going on, but they were really trying to support me and my choices. And for that, I'm literally extremely grateful. Like we talk about it now, right? But I tell them, even though, they have like their own perspectives of, oh, we should have spoken up, we should have said something. In my heart, I feel so grateful that they didn't, because anybody who would speak up about this relationship, about what was going on, I was very easy to like close them off and to like not talk to them and to withdraw from them. And I don't know, maybe we've all had a certain season in our lives where we've been in those spaces. Maybe you can relate, maybe you can't, but or maybe somebody who's like in this space, right? But I was very, very easily to like cut people off who would tell me a little bit of truth of what was going on. And so again, like these two people in my life like weren't doing that, and it made me feel supported. It made me feel like I wasn't alone. In so many different ways, emotionally, like mentally, even though again, I didn't talk about like what was going on. But okay, so we went into it, right? Like, and I think it was like a month before the wedding where I called it quits. But in that season in my life, excuse me, there was like moments where like I was crying a lot. And there was moments where like I missed my family and I missed my friends. There was moments where it was like a battle, right? It was such a battle. And I think not I think, for my own experience, that's what made me feel depressed is that, one, I didn't have an inherent or solid connection with myself. Like, I didn't have a solid foundation of who I was, of what I brought to the table. I didn't really know about my intuition. I didn't really know about what I wanted. Heck, I don't even think that question of what I want really was like solid in my life just yet. I think it popped up here and there in like different scenarios in my life. And you've heard me talk about like the whisper in your heart. However, during this season in my life, it really felt like not all of that was like non-existent, where it was like very little and I try to push it away. Or like something would pop up with like what I was reading and it was like, fuck this. So there was also maybe like aggressiveness or like anger towards those little things. And again, like I wasn't giving space for them. So from my own experience, well, looking back, and I think, to be honest, guys, I think it's like the first time that I'm sharing this story and I'm talking about it out loud. And I'm only saying that because I can feel myself being a little bit like, like a little worried. I don't know why. I think just because it's very vulnerable to like just talk about it. I didn't even think about it before coming on here and sharing this. But yes, okay, so I'm gonna share it with you guys as I'm sharing it with like that person in the car ride. But so going back to that space of the depression, from my experience, the reason why I fell into a depression was because it was a battle in my head of two things, right? It was one, my parents want me to do this. My parents want me to break up with him. They want me to come back home. They're so angry. I want to please them, but at the same time, I had a lot of pride. So at the same time, I want to show them that they're wrong. I want to show them that whatever perspective they have of this guy, of this marriage, of me, like they're wrong. I want to make sure that they know that they come around eventually. And it was more like also they want me to go back to school and I don't want to. They want me to just be back in their lives and be in their home and do all these things for them. So it was like that story, right? Like a lot of that story and a lot of that stuff too came in with like friends. Like, oh, my friends don't see it either. Like they don't see that I'm happy. They don't see that this is going to work out. And again, pride was present. Let me show them that they're wrong. Let me show them that like I got this, that I am an adult, that I am capable of my own choices and my own parts in my own life. Right? There was that. There was like another part where it was like, I want to help this guy. I want to help. I don't want to give too much details like of other people's personal lives and stuff, but it was like, okay, like I want to help this guy. Like I want to make sure that this guy like succeeds and I can see maybe he's capable of. So I want to make sure that, he could have those same opportunities. Like I I don't know if I want to say that I love the guy, but it's like I have compassion for this guy. Like I really care about this guy. Like how can I help? How can I show up for him in these different ways? The other part was like I really, really connected with parts of his family. And I've always wanted community, right? Or I've always wanted like that family part in a partnership. So for me, it was like, oh, but I love his family. I like his family. I like being around his family. Like, I don't want to stop whatever it is that we have going on because I'm enjoying my time with them. It was more so too like crap, like I don't want his friends to think that I'm a bitch if I back out now or if I back out at any point. Like crap, I don't want his family to think that I'm playing games. Like what if they think that I'm immature? What if they think that like I'm not the person that I say that I am? Guys, like it's a lot of these thoughts too. If you see me on camera, right, you can go on YouTube and like check that out, but two things. Two heavy ass fuck things, right? And both, right, in a way, were adding some type of validation or praise where it's like, I want to make sure my family feels like I want to get praise for my family, but at the same time, I want to get praise from this new group of people in my life. So it was just very chaotic. So every day it was like a war within my head of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. But then also pride was very, very present, right? And that's something that I also encourage you to ponder on is how many of us maybe are going through like seasons in our lives and we're so prideful and we don't want to be wrong. And we rather suffer, we rather not listen to ourselves, we rather fucking be in a muck, be in these spaces of uncomfortableness and of resistance rather than just freaking saying, oh my God, I was wrong. Taking accountability and being like, yeah, you guys were right. Right? Because that adds peace. Like that adds to whatever thing that we actually want in our seeking. That adds like an easeful heart. Yes. So ponder on pride, right? Like ponder on like what is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to be right? Are you trying to show other people that they're wrong? Like, why are you not okay with admitting that maybe you were wrong this time? So in those two spaces, it was pride too. And yeah, like I think I opened up maybe to like one or two people, and I actually opened up to like one of my aunts, right? And I was like venting to her, and it was like, this is what's going on, like this and this. And I said it in my own way, right? Like, definitely didn't have the awareness to share it like I am right now, but it was very much like in it. And what she responded was, sweetheart, you should go look for a psychiatrist. And that literally just crushed me. Because my first thought was like, I don't think I'm crazy. Again, maybe like a judgment back then, right? Because I don't think you're crazy if you have a psychiatrist. But back in the day, or years ago, it was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not crazy. Or like, I don't think I'm in it that bad. Am I? And like, that was it. That was like the end of the conversation. And it made me feel so much more alone. So it made me feel like, okay, like, I guess I'm in it. Like, totally in it. Right. So in those spaces, yeah, those spaces are definitely hard. What I wanted to share with us too is like why, right? Like why is it so easy for us to say yes and to fall into these patterns? Why is it so easy for us to sometimes not even realize what we're getting ourselves into, right? And I wanted to touch on like 2 points with this, which is what is on my blueprint. But one of them is that we justify, and again, I'm talking from experience, we justify and we look at the little positives and make them bigger than they actually are. And what do I mean, like we justify, right? We justify how these feelings that we have are maybe wrong. We justify that the discomfort, the resistance, the pushback, the feeling is either normal, that we have to put up with it, that it's maybe like just a season. We like justify by adding some type of fucking story how it's okay for us to deal with it, right? And we look at the little positives. We look at the little positives and we make them again like bigger than they actually are. So what happened to me like during that season is that I very much like pushed these feelings down, and I very much told myself that it was normal, that it was part of a relationship, that it was part of, just it's my story's gonna be one of those stories where families don't get along with my boyfriend or my husband. It's gonna be one of those. And um yeah, just trying to justify why these feelings were not okay or why those feelings, my feelings were wrong, right? Which is crazy, like justifying why my feelings were wrong and looking at the little things here and there of what he did, of what the family did, and really making them bigger and soaking that in of like, oh yeah, like of course I'm like loved here, like especially when shit's not going well with your family, it felt like it added to it, like, oh, of course I'm wanted, this is what a family looks like and this is what it should be, and making them bigger than it is, right? So again, like it's one of those things to like ponder on in terms of like, are you justifying those feelings that are yours on how you shouldn't be feeling that way? And I'm curious to like encourage or even challenge to allow yourself to feel those feelings and ask them what they're feeling and why, like, I don't want to say why, but like ask them, yeah, like they're present, ask them why they're visiting or why they're there. Ask those feelings if they have like something to share with you. Hmm. So the other thing, right, that I want to share, the second thing is that sometimes we're not really aware. Like we do think that it's normal. And kind of like what I said previously is that if we grew up being people pleasers, if we grew up trying to take care of other people's needs, if we grew up being nervous or scared of people's opinions about us, or if we grew up adding our worth or validation from like others or trying to look a certain way, then sometimes these feelings are almost like normal. Like again, adding to the justification, like, okay, these feelings are here, like it's normal, I guess, right? Like just keep doing it without asking ourselves and adding validation to ourselves that these are our feelings and they're happening for a reason and getting curious with them, right? Because how many of us, like even for my own upbringing, like growing up, excuse me, um, it was very much about like, okay, like what does my uncles need when they're at the house visiting, right? Like I remember even like, and I love this part, right? So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing because I do enjoy this part of my childhood. But again, it was very focused around like my dad. And so my dad would get home and super funny because now looking at it, I'm like, is this even like healthy? Like he would ask me to prepare a beer for him with the Budweiser and the Clamato. And it would just be like a routine that every day when he got home from work, like I'd have a beer ready for him. And there wasn't any consequence, like if I didn't, right? Like nothing would happen. But it was like this form of, okay, my dad's priority in the house. It's his needs first over everybody else in certain areas, right? Like not all the time, because I feel like my parents were really good with like our needs and our wants. Maybe not emotionally, but um, but that was like a thing when he got home from work. Okay, like he just got home, he's tired, right? He worked all day. He's working for us. So what does he need? And the way that I was able to provide was, okay, have a beer ready for him. And I would, and that praise felt really good, right? Like I felt loved by my dad. I felt he was gone all day. He wasn't really present when it came to like school stuff and stuff like that. So for me, it was like this moment of maybe like a high as a kid, like like it's my daddy, like of course here. And the other thing too that I would love to do, but again, going around like somebody else's needs, is that I would take off his shoes for him when he got home from work. Like I would be so excited to take off his shoes and his socks, and it would literally be like a king treatment of like, okay, here are your sandals, like rest up, love you. And again, like it's not something that I think of going back as like, man, like that's shitty, right? No, I actually enjoyed it, and it brings a smile to my face even as I'm thinking about it. But again, it goes back to somebody else's needs, right? So in those spaces, I didn't have resistance that I'm talking about, right? But let's talk about um like maybe hugging people, right? Like I have always loved affection. Like I'm totally a touch person. But growing up too, it's like whenever somebody came at the house, it was always like go hug them. You have to greet them. Go hug them. And sometimes I think when it was like strangers and stuff, like I didn't want to. Like I just didn't want to hug the person. And I think one person would come and he was like a jewelry person. And I think my mom would be like, "Oh, go, like say hi." And it's like I didn't want to. And that's where like the uncomfortable came in, right? Like the discomfort. Like I just didn't want to for whatever reason. And yet I was pushed to do it. Same with like certain family members, right? Like sometimes I wouldn't want to talk to like a specific family member. And my mom would be like, no, go and say hi, go and ask how they're doing. And it's like, okay, but I don't want to. And again, discomfort was there and I still had to. So a lot of those things, it's like, okay, we grow up having to do this thing that we don't want to do and saying yes to it, even with the discomfort. And we can't even ask ourselves growing up why we are feeling discomfort. There's like no room in our family systems to even explore that, right? There's no room for that at all. And like it's shitty because I know there's like worse stories of, you know, feeling discomfort, family pushing, and it leads to something horrific. So again, it's like there was no space growing up to explore those spaces, or for our families to respect our own boundaries or to respect our feelings. So, when we're in these spaces, like sometimes we think it's normal, right? So yeah, and so going back to the question of like how many people are depressed because they can't say no. So how many of this like is added to those feelings of depression? And I get it, like I'm not talking about the clinically depressed or something chemically in your brain type of depression. I am very aware that there's different types of scenarios, different types of stuff going on, but I'm specifically talking about when we can't say no, right? When we're not choosing peace, when we're choosing everything that I just said, rather than like repeating it. And one of the stories also pops out, and that's why it just made me even ponder after the fact, right? That it must be common, like it must be common for us or people to feel depressed for saying no, and we go to like a psychiatrist, or we do end up going to like a therapist, and we get diagnosed or we get handed pills, and it's not even about that. Like maybe that's not what we need. Maybe that's not the answer, and yet we're adding to our stories that that is what's happening. And it's actually no, like how are we living? Like again, like where are we not saying no? Like where are we at that we feel energetically not peaceful or not okay, and yet we're still pushing ourselves to be in those places, situations with people, and that's what's making us depressed, right? So a while ago, I was talking to one of my aunts, and one of my aunts was sharing how she wanted me to help um, one of the nurses that would come in to like help her husband and stuff like that, to like talk to her, because she had been feeling like super depressed. And I was asking her like, oh, like what's going on? And I guess like this woman had been to the psychiatric hospital twice, and they've given her pills and all that stuff. And I was like, oh man, like I was like, I'm not a therapist, like I can't do any of that. But maybe I can help her find a therapist. And I had asked like what's going on in her life. And she was telling me that like her husband was an alcoholic. Her husband every day would come home and like yell at her. There was like verbal abuse. At some point, I think there was like physical abuse, like with her and her kids. How she wanted to go to work, and sometimes because there was like so much happening, like she wouldn't be able to show up. And just like a lot of that dynamic. And she felt like she was going crazy, and she had panic attacks. And I think through like her panic attacks, like it landed her in the hospital twice. And my first thought was like, oh my goodness, like she's not crazy. She doesn't need fucking pills. Like what she needs is like at least one supportive person to bust the bubble that whatever she's dealing with is not normal, that she can leave, that she can walk away from this relationship, and there is some type of help outside for her to like thrive and survive, right? So again, it's like stories like that where it's like I don't know why she decided to stay. I don't even know like what the update is like of her now, but it's like even in marriage, right? It's like how many people feel like they're obligated, or they feel obligated to stay because it's my husband, it's my wife, it's like the family, and yet there's so much suffering happening within that person, so much of that depression happening, or that dark bubble happening because of that, because of the obligation, because of the pride, because of the, again, like validation, all that good stuff. Not good stuff at all. No, actually. So yeah, like when I heard her story, I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, like I would love to connect with her and like talk to her. It never happened, right? So hopefully she's okay now. And it was like years ago. But it's like the whole time it was like, that's why she's going to the hospital, like psychiatric hospital, or hospitalized. It's not because she's and even to like add to it, excuse me, my aunt was telling me how the husband would actually tell her that she's crazy. And because she would go to the hospital, it would just be more fire to him to say, like, see, you are crazy, like you're the crazy one. And yeah, and like, right, like there's so many different stuff that we can talk about here, like the gaslighting, the manipulation, like so much going on in those spaces. But again, going back to just the saying no part. Like, what if it was just a little bit of awareness of like, hold on, like, no, I do not deserve this type of treatment, and putting your foot down. Like, no, actually, I'm not going to allow this to happen in my life right now. Like, even if you're living with a person, energetically just building boundaries, right? Like, or no, you know what? Like, I'm not going to come home and cook you dinner. I'm going to stay out and I'm going to go find some kind of group, or I'm going to go hang out with a friend. Again, it's like choosing those things that maybe add peace already to your life, choosing those things that make you feel good already in your life, and going from there, right? So one of the things that I wanted to share too, which is because I'm talking about, you know, like those little, because it's like, how do you do that change, right? Like, how do you go from being in this space to like, okay, now I got it, or now I see it? I feel like there is like this middle thing that happens, or that has to happen to be aware. And two things that happened, right? Or two things that I want to share with us is that one of the ways that I learned for myself, and one of the ways that I was able to see it, is that I had like friends in my life that were able to point it out. And again, like, it comes back to like whenever we're ready, right? So in this moment, I think I was already like in the depths of these feelings, and I had gone out wedding dress shopping with some friends during that time, and we had gone back home to like their house, and they asked if I wanted to smoke weed, and I said yes, right? And I had stopped smoking because he didn't like it, right? So many other little different things that don't need to be shared on a podcast, but I stopped smoking weed for a while because of that, and I was like, okay, like, fuck it, like, I'll just smoke. And I think maybe the weed made me feel more open or more like vulnerable, but it came out for me to say like, hey guys, like, I don't know, like, if it's just me, but I feel like I'm being manipulated. Or maybe if it's not manipulation, like, I just feel like it's that type of energy. Like, I don't know what it looks like. And that created like such an openness for these people in my life at the time to share. And these are the people that I actually cut off, or that I slowly withdrew from. I didn't cut them off completely, but I slowly withdrew from them, right? Because they would tell me like, hey, like, I don't know about this, like this and this. So I think they also took it as like an opening, like, okay, like, we're about to fucking tell you. And they did. Like, they told me more of their observations. They told me like what they felt, like told me their own personal experiences. But one of the things that got to me was that my friend had told me that recently my mom had been in and out of the hospital because she was having anxiety attacks, like panic attacks. And that literally crushed me. Oops, excuse me, let me drink some water. And that literally crushed me. And one of the first thoughts that I had, was, okay, it's one thing for me to suffer on my own because of my actions, but for another person to suffer, and it's an extension of suffering of mine, like, fuck no, you know? So, like, I talked to her, whatever, and not my mom, I talked to my friends, and it just became like, it felt like the bubble that I was in, or the tunnel that I was in, officially kind of popped. And I was like, okay, like, I have to do something about it. Like, I was wrong. And it felt as if in that moment there was a space of pure humble, of like, fucked up. Like, I totally fucked up. Like, I was in this space of pride and wanting to show people that they were wrong. And now, like, I'm really in the depths of it. So I ended up coming, I think, like, I ended up like sleeping at their house that night. And the next day I ended up talking to my mom and my dad. And I was like, hey, like, can I come back home? Because they had moved out, right? And I was like, can I come back home? Like, I think I was wrong. And my mom was more like, oh my God, like, of course. My mom's always like forgiving. She's like, of course, like, we love you and we want you back home. And my dad was more like, I'm not going to believe it till I see it, but the house is always open for you. And like, that was it. And I came home the next day. And then it became just like a process of like, what just happened, right? Like, what just happened. And so that's one thing, right? Like, so it's in there. It's in there. There is a point through these seasons where something happens and you're officially ready to like see it, to feel it, to be aware of it. Yeah, and kind of like make the change, or even like just the awarenesses of it, right? But the other thing that I wanted to share too like earlier I said there's like the two things, right? Like I mentioned the dynamic with my family and like where they were at and like how I wanted their praise, and I mentioned the dynamic of him and his family and how I also wanted praise. So one of the things that I was missing, and I think it's one of the things that we as humans miss, is that connection with ourselves, is that strong as foundation, groundedness connection with ourselves, which is like this is the way that I see it. I see it like this, and yet like this is like our connection, right? Because it's like when we have this connection, when we have our intuition, we are able to move through these two different things a lot better. And of course, like we're humans, right? Again, like I said, like if we grew up in these certain environments and it's normal, it takes time to learn, and it takes time to continuously to check in with our intuition and to trust it and to lean in it, right? So it's like, yeah, life's going to happen that way where we're going to want to be praised by these people, or we're going to feel guilty about saying no with these people, or where there's like situations we don't really feel good about, but we're kind of like, should we go anyways? Or there's like events that like, same thing, like we don't really feel good about it, but like, should we go? But at the end of the day, through all of that is like connecting back to our gut, to our intuition, to that connection with ourselves and asking us like, what do I want? Like, what do I want in this moment? And even asking our intuition, like, what are you saying? What is it that feels peaceful and at ease? And even connecting to your heart, like, okay, like what feels good to my heart? Right? Like one of the things that popped up here and there towards the end of that relationship is like how bad I wanted to go to Vietnam. How bad I really, 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 really wanted to move abroad for a year. And I wasn't listening to it. That wasn't priority. So I think even in those spaces, maybe we do have some sense of our intuition or our gut, and it's not priority. Because I do remember here and there having intuitive feelings. The first day that I met him, I remember having this intuitive feeling of like walking away. And again, there's like no story to our intuition. There's no why. It's just boom, it's a whisper. And he didn't listen to it, right? And again, there's no regrets, right? Like I don't have any regrets whatsoever because I learned so much. But even like throughout, there's like intuitive feelings of like walking away. Nope, I don't know why. Like why should I walk away? Like towards the end, it was like a very strong sadness of like, I really just want to move abroad. And yet, like, I said yes to a marriage and now I have to commit. Like, I have to say yes and move through it. And that made me also like depressed because I was putting myself second. Like, I was putting my dreams aside. So again, it's connecting to those parts and making it fucking priority. Like, make that connection with yourself priority, asking yourself consistently, and again, like moving through it, right? Gracefully and like patiently with it. And I haven't had any experience like that since then because I've made my gut priority, right? Like I've made my intuition priority. And even in this last relationship that I was in, like we were together for 3 years, and even then it was still continuously like checking in with myself, like, okay, like how am I feeling about this? And he's speaking up more often, right? And like, what is my intuition saying? And like looking back, right, it feels like fuck, like I did a really fucking good job. And I'm proud of myself because I stayed committed to my intuition and to my gut. And yeah, like, and it still work, right? Like I'm still working on it now. And it's like a forever journey. And again, like I feel like as we continue, it's like kind of like learning a new skill, right? Like the more we practice it, like the more it's gonna get stronger, the more we're able gonna feel it. Like as we practice it, like it does become easier. And it's like that becomes a new normal, right? Like listening to our gut becomes a new normal and becomes life rather than like this other stuff. So I feel like at some point it just takes over. So yeah, guys, so that is like the episode for today. Yeah. I'm like looking at my blueprint, trying to make sure I don't have anything else I would like to say. But yes. taking a deep breath in because I was like a lot to share as I'm like processing it or like thinking out loud for the first time in public. Yeah, and shout out to like the people in the car encouraging me to share this part of my journey and part of my story. So if any of this resonates with you, if you guys have any questions, if it doesn't make sense, or if you think you're in something similar, or if, like any of that, like totally reach out. Don't be a stranger. There's no judgment whatsoever. Recently, like I was in those spaces like this summer, right? And I'm gonna do an episode at some point about these things, but this summer it was a hard summer because I felt sadness a lot and grief and rage. And it was very hard for me to reach out to like my closest friends to simply say, hey, I'm really feeling it today. Hey, I'm like sad today. Because I had all these stories of like, why should I tell him? Like, what for? Like, let me self-soothe. Like, I got it, right? And again, it's like I try to practice everything that I share on here, and that's one of them. So I would reach out, and every single fucking time I felt so much better because they greeted me with love, with acceptance. They allowed me and showed me that it was part of it, that it was part of being human and part of like my experience, and that it was normal. So same thing with you guys. Like if you guys have those stories of like wanting to reach out, like you'll feel so much better afterwards. So don't listen to your ego and your stories of like why not to. Okay, so with that said, guys, thank you for being here and much, much, much love.